This is an Irreverent podcast. Check out irreverent.fm for shows from all our friends. Hello and welcome to Exvangelical. I'm your host, Blake Chastain. This week's episode is a live recording we did at City Lit Books in the Logan Square neighborhood right here in Chicago, my city, and it features a wide cast of characters. Since this was a live event, there are introductions right within the audio, but as a brief recap, this episode features Josiah Hesse, who is the author of the Carnality series, a wonderful psychological horror book series. The books are very good, and I talked to him about them in the final segment of the show. Before that segment, though, we hear from Alessandra Ragusin and Ryan Connell, two writers that have been touring with Josiah for a couple of months as a part of their UnApologetics tour. You can find out more about all of them in the show notes. We were also joined in the final segment by special guest Chris Stroop. Also, I want to mention that it's been officially announced that CBS Religion will be featuring Exvangelical in an upcoming documentary set to air on December 2nd of this year, 2018. So you may see some footage from this event there as well. So please be sure to check that out. If you're a cord cutter, I have been told that it will be available as streaming as well. As always, you can find me on Twitter at brchastain, follow the show at exvangelicalpod on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, and join the Facebook group by searching for Exvangelical. You can also support the show via Patreon at patreon.com/exvangelicalpod. And I want to thank everyone that came out to this event. We hope to have more in the future. One quick audio note, this was a live event, and at live events, unexpected or unforeseen things happen. We had audio recording, but no amplification. It was a small, intimate venue, so we didn't really need it. And there was some crackling of microphones and mic cords that we didn't hear as a result as we were recording. I hope it doesn't prove too distracting for you, but for those who've given me lower star ratings on Apple Podcasts for audio quality, this is my caveat/apology in regards to that. Live events are a new thing for me, and I am learning on my feet and as I go here. So apologies for some of that quality there, but I think that overall it is good, and the content, of course, is great. So let's get right into it.
Everybody.
Hi, Josiah.
Do you need this on record?
Yeah, there's no...
This is kind of a pretentious microphone because there's not actually any amplification, but and that was such an awesome introduction. I don't know quite what else there is to say. The apologetics tour that I've been doing with my friends Ryan and Alessandra, my former fundamentalist buddies from Denver, kind of started as just going on a book tour to release Carnality 2, but those are often lonely and quite boring events, and I wanted to travel with my friends, but also work on this project where we kind of revisit a lot of the evangelical touchstones from our childhood and do these interviews with other ex-evangelicals to kind of share our stories, hear their stories, commiserate, validate each other. So much of this community, which has been absolutely wonderful, has been built up online, which gives us so much strength and solidarity, but it also, is can be a little combative and divisive at times, especially when dealing with something like theology and sexuality.
Why are you looking at me, Josiah?
So doing events like this, where we're all hanging out face to face is so important and so cathartic, but then also visiting the mementos, the horrors of our childhoods was also cathartic. We went to Branson, Missouri to see Jim Baker's compound with all his survivalist gear and the Spanish rice buckets. We went to Nashville to interview Kevin Max of DC Talk. And Where else? We were in New Orleans. We were at Paula White's church in Orlando. We went up to New York and interviewed Linda K. Klein, whose recent book, Pure, about the purity culture, has been an incredibly rewarding experience. I think rewarding is quite the wrong word, actually. It's been very helpful in the process of just kind of figuring out what it was we grew up in and how it affected us and how it stays with us to this day. And it's been such a wonderful experience for me to travel with my friends and get to hear them read their literature and not make this just all about me and my book. And I'm so excited to bring the first reader of the night to the stage. You can see her work at My Green World blog. Green World Writing, I'm sorry. Please welcome my friend Alessandra Ragusin.
I'm supposed to talk to you all about the devil tonight, to tell you why he's not such a bad guy, but no. Tonight I'm going off book because I don't have time to talk to you all about fiction. I no longer have time to offer you an escape, so I said instead I come to you with a call to action. Heads up, there's a blanket trigger warning on this whole speech for just about anything and everything you can think of, so if you need to leave, I understand, otherwise buckle up with me. I am enraged and filled with pain, but I can no longer use only words when action is so necessary. I have a deep fire in me, and now I open it to the oxygen beyond my lungs in the desperate hope that it will catch and find its way to you and fill you with a blaze of justice and truth, because we are out of time, and status updates and memes and isolation will not do. We are living under the rule of unabashed, unashamed rapists, racists, and fascists. I wish I could say I am surprised by current events, but the state of the world has been a long time coming. When we treat patriarchy and sexism and racism and classism as harmless, we allow it to take root and to grow. We have before us a planet and a nation covered in poisonous thorns, and we have yelped and screamed, but now it is time to remove them from our sides and from our paws and set fire to it all. I know when I speak of patriarchy and sexism, racism, classism, many roll their eyes. See, the tools of the patriarchy are clever and near invisible. Abusers and oppressors have the skill of taking the language of the abused and the oppressed and the language of goodness and perverting them for their own gain, personal, political, and monetary. Take self-care, for example. As Audre Lorde told us, self-care is a radical act. But how often are we told that it's a shopping spree or an expensive spa day or a luxury car? In seconds, what was a radical act has become capitalism's standard. I'm not here to define your self-care, but I am here to tell us all that we should be wary of any system that tells us our mental, physical, and spiritual health is to be bought and that it is a commodity. Health should have no price tag, and anyone who tries to sell us our peace of mind is a crook. There is the obvious patriarchy we can see, and then the even more terrifying patriarchy that hides in plain sight. I have been raped 4 times in the past 7 years. Once was by a man who claimed he didn't know it was wrong to pin me down in a park and rip me in half. But even worse than that were the other 3 times. All 3 rapes were committed by people who were my friends. Both men claimed and professed to be feminists, to be allies, to be progressive, to be woke. They use the language, they look the part. There are people who put on the skin of feminism, but who harbor misogyny and dominion in their hearts. And I am overwrought with horror by the ease with which these people vomit up the words of love and then turn around and treat women like jizz rags, and minorities and other marginalized people as the butt of jokes, as worthy of degradation and violence. The work of feminism, the work of love, the work of justice is painful and jarring and demolishes the long dominating ways of our present and past, and it is no wonder that so many run from it. But there will be pain in life no matter which way we go, so why not make our pain something worthwhile and fruitful? Why not do what we can to lessen the severity of the sorrow around us? Why not make each other's lives that much less shitty and maybe even occasionally good? Why hurt and mock and murder and rape and torture? Why? We should all dedicate ourselves to lives of fierce examination, unrelenting growth, and the pursuit and practice of love as a radical choice that dismantles and disrupts and bolsters and affirms. The cracks in the foundation of the patriarchy are deep and wide, and the patriarchy will do whatever it takes to fill the gaps and cling with bloody fingers to the crumbling facade. We are a storm. We are a tsunamic force raging toward the shore in the scaffolding of white supremacy, of sexism, classism, homophobia, Christian dominionism, manipulation, abuse. All the pillars of the patriarchy will not hold. I am here to bear witness and to share not just my experience, for I come to the table loaded with privilege, but also the ways in which I have witnessed oppression being enacted upon others. My best friend is Black and Thai. She was called the N-word as she walked through the park alone, and no one thought twice about it. Many have witnessed things like this happen and have never stopped to help or speak up. I know I have, because we have made gross negligence and degradation and paralytic anxiety an acceptable part of everyday life. We witness babies and children gunned down in their classrooms because a fragile white man felt unfairly rejected when he thought he deserved sex. We have seen queers gunned down in clubs and on the street by men who see homosexuality as icky, as something to be annihilated, as a threat. There are babies and children still alone in detention centers, and just because these centers aren't the concentration camps of the Holocaust does not mean that they aren't hell. We listen to critics asking why survivors of rape and sexual assault don't come forward sooner, and in the next breath, they elect those rapists and assaulters to the presidency and the Supreme Court. Police execute Black people in broad daylight on camera and are allowed to go free. Young men of color are held to the standards of adults, while young white men are treated like precious baby boys. I am queer, and I have had enough of hearing abuse is a necessary part of my existence. I remember walking alone at night in downtown Tulsa when a truck full of young white men slowed down to yell, "Hey, faggot," at me and then speed off. I was told I shouldn't worry. They're just being assholes. They wouldn't do anything, but they do. Time and time again, these people hollering slurs in the streets do act out further. I am exhausted and furious and tired of hearing stories of trans and people of color and queer and female and all marginalized or minority peoples and children being slaughtered in our streets, in their homes, in their schools. The loudest voices seem to be those defending the murderers and butchers and attackers, but now when we hear them whine and throw pity parties for themselves, we must sing so loudly that we drown them out and they retreat. We must do better. When we see injustice happening, we cannot allow the anxiety to paralyze us, but we must use it to drive us to action. Speak up and act. Walk people home. Stay with someone if they seem scared or alone. Listen to your intuition and jump into action when you see a woozy or delirious woman at the bar, or when someone is yelling slurs or posturing aggressively. The best way to alleviate our hesitation over sharing our pain is to know that someone has our back. To know that when we fall or are forced down, someone will be there to lift us on their shoulders and carry us until we're a little stronger. To know that we would show this same fierce compassion to others. To know this isn't about gods or devils, it's about human beings. Be a fucking killjoy, because there should be no joy in the subjugation and violation of human beings. Guard each other, take care of each other, show compassion to each other, shut up and listen to each other. If we have privilege, we must no longer use it to advance our continued narrative of dominance and ignorance, but we must use it to raise up others and give platforms from which to preach. Share with each other. Share everything, our skills, time, money, food, homes, clothes, talents, passions, everything. We have made islands of ourselves, and it is time to build bridges, not walls or fences. Regardless of what you believe comes next, it would be a shame to spend this life in bitterness and agony and hate. I know we all have great anxiety over our futures and what to do about them. I often wonder, what can I do? How can I help? I have nothing to give. I have no resources, and the sea of possibility is endless. But I sat down and brainstormed some ideas because now is the time for action, and I'd like to share them with you. Former Republican Representative Michelle Bachmann said, "To help people, we need wealth. But I offer this list as an alternative because we are more powerful than money. It is easier and simpler to help people than we have been taught or led to believe. Step 1. Why not cook up a crock pot full of chili or soup and sit outside and offer it to everyone who goes by? Feed the community. Learn who your neighbors are. If you have training in fitness or self-defense, set up free self-defense classes in the park to teach basic ways to fight back and defend and intervene. If you're academically minded or passionate about teaching, join a free tutoring program and teach people how to read or do math or whatever it is. Turn your yard into a garden and share the extra from your harvest with those who have limited means to feed themselves. Offer to teach them how to grow their own gardens. Lend books, host discussion groups. There's no time for elitism, and the best way to spread knowledge and creativity is through reading and discussion and education. If you're gifted in finance, take a few hours to make a flyer on basic personal finance for people who don't have access to things like that. If you have experience with the legal system, consider typing up a Know Your Rights pamphlet to distribute for free around your neighborhood, community, and city, and a pamphlet on where and how to find inexpensive or free legal help. If you have a car, offer people rides everywhere, to interviews, the grocery store, the bank, the library, parks and open spaces, to meetings and classes and marches and protests. Record and share the stories of people around you. Begin to share the stories of those outside the dominant narrative and let others have a voice for once. Make art with fury and meaning and purpose and power. Teach classes about menstruation to clueless men. Teach comprehensive sex ed. Volunteer at Planned Parenthood and educate people about what they actually do. Volunteer to escort people through the crowds of hatred and through the front door. Teach people to not fear and hate, but love and respect and understand their bodies and the bodies of others. Do the work of educating yourself. Have the difficult conversations. Ask and explore the painful and difficult questions. Don't run from struggle, but meet it head on. Utilize free spaces like parks, libraries, schools, homes, because you don't need money to be of use. If you have 2 good sweatshirts, give one away to someone living on the street, not to a faceless organization, but put the things directly into the hands of the people that need them. Volunteer at shelters. Offer free resume building classes and workshops. Organize clothing, sleeping, food drives in your neighborhood, and then take these items straight to the streets. Just do something good. Now it's time to prove our mettle and not just show our teeth, but sink them into the meat, into the work. Maya Angelou said that times like these are precisely when artists get to work. And I would add that we are broken-hearted people living in the world of grief, and we know there is an answer, and it is to not just let it be. You may hear me and rightfully assume I am calling out Republicans, conservatives, evangelicals, white nationalists, but I am also furious at the behavior of liberals and Democrats and so-called progressives. I am appalled by anyone who claims the ideals of social justice and then only tweaks the message of the patriarchy from atop their hoard of wealth while waiting for commands by corporations who measure the value of life in dollar signs. Don't be fooled by it. We have celebrities telling us how we should vote when they have more than enough money to solve the Flint water crisis, more than enough money and power to restore Puerto Rico, more than enough money to create and implement universal health care. The wealthy of the world have enough money to solve the global food and climate crises, but they don't. Instead, they tell us to use a new thermostat or unplug our electronics, carpool, while they accumulate more and watch and laugh at our death. Give the money back to the people because we are in the trenches every day and we have not lost touch. Head to the polls this November, but know that the 2-party system that created and supports this circus won't have anything or won't do anything of any real value to put a new, better place in order. It's time for a true government of the people, by the people, for the people. The system of patriarchy has us operate in binaries, but as there is so much more than black and white, red or blue, either or in life, then so must there be in our government. Revolution does not mean simply a new president or a blue wave, but it means an entire system of change. Revolution is not a new hashtag or an occasional march, but it is the daily practice of subverting the norm. It is the daily practice of feeding and clothing and caring for and carrying our neighbors. And let me tell you now that every human is your neighbor. When we believe that revolutions can only be carried out by politicians and money, then we are feeding back into the system that created all of these problems in the first place. A revolution must be free and accessible to all, and if it is not, then it is false. And when we come to a revolution, we must come authentically and ready to serve and ready to work where needed, or we must do the raw and hard work to change our hearts before we start. Revolution is not just going to exceptionally loud protests and marches every few months. Revolution must also be in how we treat each other and subvert the system in our day-to-day. It doesn't matter if we yell and scream for 2 hours if we then revert to our mindless habits as soon as we leave. We need both. We need disruption in the streets and camaraderie and action in our communities. And I know we're tired, but as a group, we can find the energy to continue in ways individuals never do. Let us join in action because there's room for everyone in the cause. We are fellow travelers through this collective experience of life. We are in this together, and the more we infight among ourselves, the less time and energy we have to take up the cause and fight those laughing at us from penthouses and churches and yachts and government halls. Our problem is not with each other, it is with those who oppress and continue to abuse. And we are so much stronger when we come together, when we make a net to catch our friends as they fall and a tidal wave to tear down scaffolding and walls. Audra said the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house, and we cannot come to the master with money and greed, but we must come with love as we know it, not love as we've been told. We need a change of heart, and we need to dig up the weeds from their roots and plant something new and good. We are a storm that is coming into port, and if the infrastructure cannot hold against our waves, then it deserves to be destroyed.
Oh my God. I didn't know that's what she was going to read. They have this thing about not telling me what they're going to read. And I get hit with this emotional tidal wave and have to jump back on stage afterwards. But thank you, Alessandra. That was so brave and so beautiful. These events, this evangelical community has been such a source of inspiration for me. And the reason I chose to put my stories or to create a story that was fiction is because I wanted to assemble as many stories as I could from all the people that I'd heard who'd grown up in similar environments as I did. And before I bring up the next author, I want to show you a quick video trailer of the first book. And this really deals with the kind of parental environment that a lot of us grew up in, those of us who weren't converts to Christianity or evangelical Christianity who were born into it. I think our parent stories are so integral to that narrative. And so with the first Carnality book, I wanted to tell the story of two hippies growing up in the Jesus movement of the 70s, and it was a big excuse to write about the Jesus movement in the 70s, which I'm kind of obsessed with, because if you don't know, it was a pretty big piece of American pop culture that doesn't get talked about a whole lot. So if we could hit those lights, we'll check out this trailer.
I don't remember how I arrived at this abandoned island hotel. The only way to remember it is to write my story, starting at the beginning with my parents in 1967. They fell in love at the Monterey Pop Festival in California. She was a wild teenager with an attachment disorder, and he was a hitchhiker orphan from Iowa. When a bad trip landed my dad in the arms of an evangelical minister, he was converted and became a leader of the Jesus Freak movement. Born in the ashes of the flower power scene that swept California in the late 1960s, the Jesus Freaks dressed, spoke, and lived just like the other hippies, but had traded in the Timothy Leary message of peace through acid for the Billy Graham rhetoric of salvation through Jesus Christ, seasoned with a bit of doomsday prophecies and conspiracy theory paranoia. This soon swept the nation, creating an industry of Christian rock bands that saw the conversion of Bob Dylan.
In the book of Daniel and in the book of Revelation, which just might apply to these times here.
And made this end times prophecy into the best-selling nonfiction book of the decade, as well as a movie starring Orson Welles.
Is our planet truly in mortal peril?
Everywhere Christian hippies were preparing for the great battle of Armageddon, where the four horsemen of the apocalypse, the Antichrist, and the decision of whether or not to receive the mark of the beast would determine their eternal fate in the afterlife. By the time I was born into this apocalyptic nightmare, my mother had sunk into a deep depression, and my father's schizophrenia had become fused with the mad rhetoric of these doomsday prophets. In 1982, he moved our family to an isolated farm in rural Iowa, where we would wait out the wars, famine, and pestilence of the coming tribulation. It was here, raised in the shadow of my father's madness, that I would learn to fear the outside world, to survive the collapse of society, and desperately pray to be spared from the eternal flames of hell. It was here that my journey began.
And available at your local bookstore. So yeah, that was some fiction, some my experience growing up in the Pentecostal world of Assemblies of God Church. We got a lot of that doomsday rhetoric throughout the 80s and 90s. And the next author that I'm going to bring up onto the stage grew up in the same environment and knows more about it than anyone I know. You can check out his writing at Holy Apostate, and he's been on the road for 8 months, visiting all kinds of evangelical touchstones and interviewing ex-evangelicals all over the country. Please welcome to the stage Ryan Connell.
Hey, how are y'all? You doing good? God damn, that was like, I feel like we're having church tonight, but like in the good way, where like people say things that matter and are of substance and make you think, and not just metaphors, you know? We've been playing a game on the road called The Holy Spirit Spoke to Me, where you just like, you know, you're like, and one of my shoes was wet because I left it out in the rain, and then the Holy Spirit spoke to me about how you need to be prepared. You know, it's just like, that's all. It's good to hear. Here's a thing that I wrote. If there's one good thing I can say about evangelical purity culture, it's that it's a perfect cover for the shy and socially awkward. It's not that I can't get a date, you see. I'm choosing not to date. It's the fundamentalist Christian version of having a girlfriend that lives in Canada. I was homeschooled with the fundamentalist Christian curriculum, so in addition to a science education tantamount to God did it, so shut up, and a highly delayed understanding of what sarcasm is, I came of age with a very limited understanding of sex. I did not have the luxury of an awkward and dry sex ed class like you heathen public schoolers. I never heard locker room half-truths from upperclassmen. I was not able to work like forensic scientists with my friends to piece together a working model of sex based on what little we saw from TV and the jokes we heard our dads say. I was on my own in a house full of only Christian books. Our encyclopedia didn't even have pictures. I knew boobs had something to do with it because I was made to cover my eyes whenever we saw them in police academy movies. But outside of that, all I really ever knew of sex growing up was that it was very, very wrong until you were married, and then it was good somehow. My first experience with pornography came when I was 12. It was in an abandoned Sunday school classroom during an all-night prayer meeting. One of the deacon's sons ripped out a page of a magazine he had found in the woods. I did not understand what I was looking at, but my body did. I felt revulsed and ashamed and titillated and obsessed. I wanted to find more, but knew of no way to do so. This being before the internet, my only recourse was the public library, where I would secretly look at the pictures of National Geographic and pour through volumes of love poetry in the hope that at least one would be about sex. Yeah, that's a laugh of recognition, you know? Yeah. I was not very successful, but did develop a lasting fondness for Elizabeth Barrett Browning. When I was 14, the movie Showgirls came out and briefly captured the nation's attention as the first NC-17 movie to gain a wide release in theaters. It captured my attention because I had the biggest crush on Jessie Spano from Saved by the Bell, if you don't know. So smart, so forceful. I did not fully understand why at the time, but I wanted her to push me around the way she did AC Slater. Being a good pastor's household, we did not have HBO, but I discovered that if you turned the TV to the channel, you could hear the audio and even sometimes make out images through scrambled pictures. Every night after my parents went to bed, I would watch scrambled images of an unarguably horrible movie with breathless anticipation of the chance to see something. anything. It was one of these nights that I had my first orgasm. I had been experimenting with masturbation from time to time for a few months prior, but had always stopped out of fear whenever things started to feel particularly good. That much pleasure had to be sin. But that night, with basically only the audio of one of Elizabeth Berkley's poorly acted sex scenes, I was not able to contain myself. Being in a dark room with still no knowledge of sex, I had no idea what had just occurred. I was certain that the warm fluid now covering my hands was blood. I had somehow broken myself. In terror and guilt and shame, I woke my mom up and told her she had to take me to the hospital. It took me an hour before I was finally able to explain what had happened. She prayed for me and told me not to do it again. I vowed to myself I never would. Again, these last recognition. It's good to get it out. Over the next several years, I became obsessed with sex. Or rather, I was obsessed with not thinking about sex. I went to True Love Waits rallies and purity dinners. I wore a gold ring adorned with a cross on my wedding finger as a reminder that whenever I had a lustful thought, I was committing adultery on my future wife. I wrote her letters, promising to remain pure and weepingly repentant for every time that I wasn't. I joined accountability groups and prayer meetings. I began researching chemical ways to kill the libido and felt pangs of jealousy when I learned about eunuchs and the chemically castrated. Saint Benedict, a 4th century monk who threw himself into a patch of briars and nettles as a way to resist sexual arousal, was a hero of mine. I prayed to have courage like his, yet my hormones always eventually won out. I can never resist for longer than a few weeks at most, a remarkable feat for most boys, but still one I saw as a dismal failure. My tribal mates and I spent the first 2 weeks of this trip traveling through the Bible Belt in the Deep South, where the most prominent billboards are either a sorrow-eyed Jesus warning against abortion or glossy, lingerie-clad women with parted lips advertising a porn store on some deserted country road 30 miles away. It reminded me of the correlation that the regions with the highest percentages of Christians is also the region with the highest usage of porn. It also reminded me of my own futile struggles to resist such places while driving through Texas, first as a Bible student, and then also as a traveling minister. Whenever I would see such a billboard, I would begin an earnest and fervent bout with spiritual warfare. I would beg and plead with God for the strength to resist. I would play worship music. I would speak in tongues. I would cast out and bind the spirit of lust. I would always still take the exit and go inside, guaranteeing that for the next several hours there would be actual, literal weeping and self-harm as I would beg God to forgive me for my weakness. During the summer of my first year at Bible school, my parents got the internet at home. This began a cycle for me of staying up all night. The first half in giddy, curious, lust-filled excitement, the latter half in a state of deep, self-hating, shameful repentance. My accountability group became little more than a way of sharing tips and secrets disguised as prayer requests. My walk with God has really suffered since I discovered this new free porn site, one of us would confess, while the rest took notes. How do you delete your history? Like, that's crazy that you can. What do you, incognito, huh? I'll pray for you. I did not know this then, but porn, as Faye Weldon once said, shows everything and tells nothing. I knew nothing of a woman's pleasure or how to give it to her, nor anything about the magnetic cosmic pool of attraction, the ecstasy of intimacy, the rapture of being lost in passion. It barely taught me anything of my own capacity for pleasure. It was always secret, furtive, shameful, and quick, like a starving man eating stolen bread. Porn is pure junk food. There's no nutrition there, no savoring. My parents once discovered what I was doing online, and even though I had not so much as held a girl's hand, they believed that I was a sex addict. And even though I was looking at straight porn, my predilection to talk with my hands and my love of musical theater must have convinced them that a gay conversion camp was what I needed. After all, we believed all sexual perversions were the same. I was able to talk them out of it, but regretted doing so. I needed the help. I was an addict. I couldn't stop. No amount of prayer or fasting or the outpouring of the Holy Spirit at church helped at all. I was sick. I was a pervert. I was the chief of all sinners. And I believed I was alone. Outside of my accountability group, no one ever talked about struggling with sex. I was certain that my friends and I were the only ones, and even then, because we all lied about the frequency of our sin, I was certain I was the only one who couldn't control himself. This deeply impacted my relationships with women. If I had a crush on someone or discovered that someone had feelings for me, I would instantly remind myself of how dirty and depraved I was. We were taught that women were pure, that they had no desire for sex. What they wanted was romance and emotional intimacy. So the fact that I was guilty of merely entertaining the idea of sex instantly disqualified me from their affections. If they knew, they would flee. They should flee. I was a monster. The day after I lost my virginity at age 23 to my girlfriend, I was surprised and deeply confused to discover that she wanted to have sex again. I assured her that I was committed to her and we didn't have to. I would just give her emotional intimacy for free. The idea that a woman would ever desire me completely blew my mind. It still does. To this day, I still feel deep embarrassment and shame whenever I feel lust or desire for anyone. I know it isn't the case, but I can't seem to shake the fear that women will see my sexuality as nothing more than repulsive and predatory. And God knows that can be the case far too often. Our sexuality is a basic and primal need, and it will be expressed in one way or another. If it is repressed the way the church teaches us to do, it will surface in distorted, cruel, and harmful ways. I have lost count of how many youth pastors that I personally know who have had sex with teenage girls from their church. Studies have shown that the evangelical world contains just as many, if not more, sex offenders and cover-ups of said sex offenders as the Catholic Church. But because there isn't one giant corporate body to cover it up, these numbers are easier to hide. Right after I graduated from Bible school, I was given the opportunity to pastor a church. The previous pastor, who was also a school teacher, was caught with a computer full of child porn. I turned the position down. As a sometimes masturbator, I believed I was in no better of a moral position and would only continue to disappoint the church. All perversions are the same. Since leaving the church, I've heard countless stories from women raised in the same culture that I was. I have learned how much worse it was for them to be relegated to little more than objects to be protected or defiled. I have heard how many felt weird and freakish for simply feeling horny. I have heard how many were insulted and assaulted and defamed by the so-called holy men that they had put their trust in. I have seen how the church covers it up, ignores their stories, attacks them for speaking out. And we don't need this last week's news to remember that this is not just a problem with the church. Though, fuck the 48% of evangelicals who said that they'll support Kavanaugh even if he's guilty. Amen. Fuck them. Spiritual values, traditional... Sorry, that wasn't written. Now I have to find where I was. Our entire culture feeds into these same problems, but the church, which should somehow be separate and transcendent of our culture, has shown time and time again that it is just as bad and corrupt as anywhere else. Its day of reckoning will come. It is long overdue. The philosopher Bertrand Russell has said that the church takes virtue and makes it vice. That our sexuality, which is natural and beautiful and a delightful things, becomes forbidden and sinful and twisted. It's done as a matter of control. Us good boys and girls raised in Christian bubbles so far from the sins our parents knew had to have brand new sins invented for us. We were condemned to hell for eternity by nothing more than our thoughts, our hormones, our curiosity. We are convinced that our thoughts, our very natures, the deepest core of our beings are horrible and corrupt and satanic. So much worse for our beloved queer and trans family. They want us broken and ashamed. It's how the church keeps us in the pews. But I also think the church is just a little bit jealous. Because there's no greater spiritual joy, no more powerful connection, nothing that elevates the human spirit more than pure, unrestrained sexuality. Sex is not a transaction, not some bargaining chip to turn in when the price is right. It should not be a one-sided endeavor. It is a dance. It is transcendence. It is a beauty that even the best poets fail to describe. It is a death and resurrection, a chance to find yourself by giving it away. No worship service, no devotion, no heaven could possibly compete. I can see why they hid it from me for so long. Thank you.
Woo. Keep it going for Ryan Connell, everybody. Yeah, Ryan, those were definitely laughs of recognition, at least on my part, I could say. So I was intending on giving a quick little reading from the novel Carnality 2 for you tonight, but I think, like a lazy substitute teacher, I'm going to skip the lesson and just go straight to a video instead, because I'm really excited to get our next group of characters up here with me. So this is the trailer for Carnality 2. If you didn't pick up from the first one, it's all narrated by this guy who's living alone on an abandoned island, and it's not really clear why he's there. Figured that out in later books. There are 6 of them, by the way. And for the first book, like I said, I love to talk about what it's like to grow up in the environment of apocalypticism, end of the world, and this is sort of along the theme of Ryan's reading, what it's like to grow up as a queer person whose fame has suddenly exploded due to his anti-gay rhetoric. It's something that anyone familiar with evangelical culture knows it has happened once or twice before. So if we could hit the lights one more time, and yeah, I hit that one.
In the 90s, evangelical culture was loaded with contradictions. Sexual lust was said to come from Satan, yet the Christian rock industry pulsed with eroticism. Worldliness was said to be an abomination, yet Christian alternatives to secular bands were an essential tool for spreading the gospel. Millions of devil worshippers were said to be raping children and animals throughout the country.
Point to satanic evidence in the drug-related murder
crimes were motivated by occult beliefs. Yes.
But the few self-proclaimed Satanists were actually just satirical atheists, pretending to worship the villain of the Bible.
The devil has always been the church's best friend because he's kept him in business.
They were the original trolls of Christianity.
There's nothing cool about a fool on drugs.
Drug use and gay sex were said to be the tickets to hell.
So we don't have to debate about what we should think about homosexual activity. It's written in the Bible.
But when I became a teenage Christian pop star, I quickly discovered that these forbidden fruits were the cornerstones of many evangelical diets.
Reverend Ted Haggard said in an interview today,
I called him to buy some meth, but I threw it away.
And did you ever have sex with him?
I went there for a massage.
I have sinned against you, my Lord.
Looking back, years later, as I live alone in an abandoned island hotel, I can see that even as a teenage boy who'd built a career as an anti-gay preacher, who believed that gay sex would lead to an eternity of torment in hell, I was willing to risk it all for the privilege of touching Sebastian Phoenix.
Jesus died for somebody's sins, but not mine. Milton, pot of thieves, wild cord in my sleeve, thick heart of stone. My sins, my own, they belong to me.
Thanks, everybody. I don't know if you caught like that split-second clip of the Christian boy band Plus One, but one of the members of that band was actually Alessandra's cousin. Fun facts. And the clip of Kevin Max from DC Talk next to Liam Gallagher of Oasis was something that's been on my mind for a long time because he wore the exact same outfit that Liam wore at this very famous Oasis concert. But he actually, Kevin Max saw the trailer and reached out to me on Twitter and admitted that he did kind of steal Liam Gallagher's style. We ended up striking up a conversation, and he had a lot of interesting things to say about the culture that made him famous, that he is no longer too proud to be associated with. But that's a whole other conversation in and of itself. I think I personally would really like to welcome to the stage two very good friends of mine that a lot of people in this room are probably familiar with. They are kind of the apostles of evangelical Christianity.
Graduated from being Moses.
Yeah, maybe you're the Moses and you're the Apostle Paul of this. We'll get it all figured out before the night's over. So please welcome to the stage Blake Chastain and Christopher Stroop.
So thanks everybody for coming. This is a great turnout, and what we're gonna do here initially is I'm gonna ask some questions to Josiah, sort of about his work, and then we'll also talk a little bit with Chris as well, and then open up to a little bit of commentary and Q&A from you guys if you have any thoughts that you'd like to add to anything that was shared. Thank you also to Ryan and Alessandra for your discussion as well.
One more time for Ryan and Alessandra, everybody.
Yeah.
Weren't those amazing? Oh my God.
Really powerful. Great stuff.
So the three of them have undergone actually many trials and tribulations to get here. They started. We met up with them first in September, and then in Florida, and then shortly thereafter, you lost the use of your car. Your car broke down.
It exploded. Just outside of Orlando.
Yeah. So, but we're really glad you made it here to Chicago. But Josiah, I'd like to hear a little bit more about where you're from. Like your main character in the books, you were also raised in Iowa. So, and in this sort of Pentecostal tradition. So, what was growing up in Iowa like, and are there any other sort of similarities that you brought into your character of Jacob?
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredibly autobiographical story with some exceptions. I like to say it's like 1/3 autobiographical, 1/3 other people's stories that I've collected as a journalist covering this community, and then 1/3 just kind of like blue sky imagination. The parents aren't really my parents. Those were kind of the characters that I had the most fun with in terms of just being these really psychotic characters. My parents are nothing like them. My dad's actually in the audience tonight. I wasn't sure if I wanted to point him out or not. He's actually a great guy, and you really shouldn't evaluate him by the dad in the carnality books. But I often like to say that, you can have a completely accurate representation of an image with a photograph, or you can have an emotional representation of an image with a painting. And this book is kind of like a painting of the emotional landscape of my childhood. So I grew up in Clear Lake, Iowa, the town that killed Buddy Holly. Next door was where the Music Man comes from in Mason City. Both towns are very proud of these facts for some unknown reason because they're really not all that flattering.
I played Winthrop in The Music Man when I was 10 years old.
Oh, yeah? Did you get the lisp?
At B4's Dinner Theater in Indianapolis.
There you go.
Well, at that time, in the late 80s and 90s, there was a kind of rapture fever that was ratcheting back up after it calming down in the 70s because, spoiler alert, their prophecies didn't come to pass. The world didn't end in 1988, but we certainly thought it was going to end in the year 2000. Y2K was a big thing for me and a lot of other survivalist evangelicals. And we had the books, the Left Behind books, that were, really gearing up that kind of urgency for the end of the world. So I was raised in a generation that was told we would never see adulthood. We would never have families. We would never grow up. The end was going to come, the mark of the beast, the tribulation. There were arguments about if you're pre-tribulation or post-tribulation, and, there was some variation on that. But we really believed that we would either be raptured up or suffer some kind of really horrible torment, pestilence, war before puberty, really, is at least what I was told. And that's kind of the same thing that Jacob grapples with in the first book. He's on an isolated farm with a schizophrenic father that really thinks the end is any day now. And with childhood, there are always misinterpretations of end times prophecy. You come home and no one's there and you think that the rapture's happened. That's something I've heard about so much from other people who've read these books or are familiar with my work. They all have that same touchstone of I came home, there was no one there. I started calling people to find out if the rapture really happened. And that really freaks you out as a little kid. And
Yeah.
When we trended the hashtag rapture anxiety on Twitter, a lot of people said they thought they were the only one who had this experience of, they can't find their parents and they think the rapture happened. Turns out there are a whole bunch of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My high school biology and AP biology teacher, by the way, was always predicting the rapture. Like, he would be like, it's probably going to happen this year around Yom Kippur. I had him for 2 years. He said that both years. I think he says it every year.
Totally within the realm of biology class. Yeah. Why not? So actually, sort of riffing off of rapture here, let's talk about hell, because that's actually sort of this obsessive topic for Jacob in the books, is this, and for his father in the first book. There's this dominating sort of fear of hell. What was that sort of like for you, and when was the first sort of point when you were made aware of the idea of hell, and how did it sort of manifest in your early faith, and subsequently, like, what do you think about it now?
I have no memory of being introduced to it, because it's sort of like asking, when did you first learn about money? Like, it's just always been around there. When did you learn about cars? Like, it's just, it was part of the fabric of my childhood, and probably no more than an hour passed without me thinking about hell until the age of 17, 18. I mean, when you think about eternity, a difficult concept to get your head around anyway, and then add torture to it, like, what's more important than that? What's more important than avoiding eternal torture? I mean, if I told you guys in this room that there's a whole army of people that are going to storm in here in 15 minutes and torture us, even for an hour, we'd all kick over our seats and, urgently run out the door. And you add sin to that, and you're not really sure what a sin is or what salvation is. What's the ticket out of this? You don't know. And so you get this hypervigilance of, like, what am I doing? And then that passage in the book of Mark about the unpardonable sin of blaspheming the Holy Spirit. It's pretty vague. What does it mean to blaspheme the Holy Spirit? It can't be forgiven? Did I do it in my head? Did I think a blasphemous thought about the Holy Spirit? Am I done? Is there no turning back?
Been there.
Right. Like, that's motivating,
Absolutely.
If you want a system of control, like, tell people they're going to be tortured forever if they don't do what you say, especially children, because that'll stick.
Yeah. Another really common theme in your book is this sort of, and we even saw it in your trailers here, was this sort of this balance of, like, this differentiation between secular and Christian culture, like, and how did you feel as a kid or as a teenager that you had to develop, like, two different senses of, like, two distinct cultures? Like, there was your Christian one that you had DC Talk, and then there was also I have a distinct memory of listening to Gin and Juice in the parking lot with my sister, and it was amazing. Like, and it was, like, sort of life-changing. But that was sort of like you develop these two different cultural skills. Was that something that you sort of became more aware of later as you were writing these books, or was it also just sort of in the air you breathe, like both of them at the same time?
I think you can articulate it as an adult looking back on it in a way you can't when you're a kid. But fear was a huge factor in that as well, because we had supernatural warfare. I believe that listening to secular music was literally opening your soul to possession by a demon, or your thoughts could be Satan speaking to you in your head. So there were periods, I went through periods of being into secular music. MTV was on, I'd get into it, but then I'd go to church camp and learn about supernatural warfare, get freaked out and burn all my CDs and all my tapes, and then, just go to the Christian bookstores. And I went through a phase of being into Christian punk rock where I didn't know that punk rock existed outside of Christianity. Right? I was into, like, all the Tooth and Nail bands without knowing anything about the Clash or the Sex Pistols, or I remember, and I would get this sensation from the music that I interpreted as the Holy Spirit speaking to me. And then when I discovered Green Day and Blink-182, and I would get that same sensation, that charge in my belly, like I want to skateboard to it, I'd be like, well, how does that work? They're singing about weed and sex, and, can that be the Holy Spirit that's speaking to me? No, and then that was just confusing. But yeah, I went through a long period of time of vigilantly only listening to Christian rock, and it becomes a pretty good industry. It's a pretty good racket because you get parents who don't want to buy Green Day for their kids, and they're like, "Oh, who's MXPX?"
Right.
You know,
I used to work in a Christian bookstore, and we had the comparison charts.
Right? Yeah.
Can I just say that Green Day Dookie was my first secular album, and I bought it with a friend that I'd made when I was in public school for half a year when we moved from Indiana to Colorado Springs, and I kind of quasi hid it from my parents.
Maybe we should collectively write Billy Joe Armstrong a letter and tell him what impact he had on our childhoods spiritually. I had that same thing, you know, like, you like Marilyn Manson? Well, try Clank. You know, try Zayo.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Oh, man. Another thing that you really develop is this really palpable sense of dread. And I don't think I was ready. Like, I've read some things that are in this sort of like psychological horror genre where it's things like Stephen King, and he's developing this atmosphere of dread. But I wasn't ready when I was reading your books for it to be so freaking personal, because you're drawing on these evangelical fears. And this is more of a comment than a question, to be honest, because that is something that that I think was really, really unexpected. And did you draw on some of the things from other horror writers or anything, or
could I just chime in quickly and just sort
that?
of like agree that when Josiah sent me a copy of Carnality 1 and I started reading through it, I was like, wow, it was hitting me really hard. And he was a good sport because he wanted me to read it and like talk about it, but I could not read it quickly, and I was struggling with pretty bad depression through this period. So I finally did read it, and I was like, damn, that is an extremely well-written book. But it was, kind of, I had to be in the right mental space to read something that powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I had a lot to draw on personally because, like, as I've been saying, I was pretty freaked out through a lot of my childhood, so I could tap into that. But I'm a big fan of Stephen King, Bret Easton Ellis, J.T. Leroy, really dark stories of childhood trauma. It's just something I gravitate towards. And if you can throw humor in there, I think you're a literary wizard. And that's kind of what I strive for, is like to go to these dark places, but then have a little one-liner in there that'll pick it up. But it's exhausting. You know, you talk about reading it. Like, I mean, writing it is just, I go into a little bit of depression and freak myself out. Like when I wrote the first one, I was living in a cabin in the mountains, like the Shining style. I think that was, was going for. And then for the second one, I was also in a cabin in the mountains. Like for half of it, I wrote at Hunter Thompson's ranch. His widow is a fan of Suspect Press, and she invited me out there to do writer's retreat. But for the second half, I went in my childhood home, where my mother is still there, in the house that I grew up in, and I'd write it late at night, and like looking out into the backyard, where I'd sleptwalked as a kid, or in the basement when I'd heard so many things chasing after me up the stairs. It was easy to get back into that headspace of just like, what was that? Did you hear that? Like in the middle of the night,
Right.
Any little sound can get the hairs in the back of your neck standing up, and then if you can get that into the prose, there's some magic there.
Right. Yeah, and you really do capture it. The final sort of question and comment I have before we turn it over, and Chris, if you have anything as well. But one of the other things that struck me both about your work as well as the other readings this evening was exploring this like a sense of not only just a duality of like cultures, but also between like physicality. Like there's so much of your book that is about sort of becoming aware of your body, and I think that's something that evangelicals are not prepared for, and because there's this sort of juxtaposition between the body negative sort of spirituality of Jacob's father, but then your main character is like going through puberty and like figuring things out and sort of discovering.
And he likes boys.
Yeah, there's all these things that are happening, and that is another element of sort of this evangelical culture that we're all sort of processing that I think is really well done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's terrifying and traumatic on its own level. But I also wanted to write a somewhat erotic book, and I love the kind of literary tool of repression as eroticism. That so much is at stake, and you better not. And if you do, it means you really, really want to, or you're incapable of resisting. And that's a fun thing to build up over a period of chapters with these characters. And then you throw in the supernatural warfare element of it. Is this my body? Is this me that's experiencing it? Or is it a demon that's inside of me that's giving me these sensations? Hell is at stake. Eternal torture is at stake. And as Jacob says in this trailer, like, he knows about hell. He knows about the eternal torture. And yet, in spite of all of that, he is going to kiss this boy because it's just beyond his control. And there's something kind of beautiful about that, but then kind of horrifying about that. And it was a lot of fun and disturbing to explore from the narrator's perspective.
Yeah. Well, we've actually got about a little less than 15 minutes before the store closes. So if anyone either has any comments, or Chris, if you have any comments about the book or anything else this evening.
I don't have too much to add at this point. I think it could be good to open it up to a public discussion. I'll just say I did an interview with Josiah for my Ex-Evangelical Conversations series on my website at chrisstroop.com. So if you want to see that, we talk about the first book. I haven't read the second book yet, but I'm definitely going to. I think the eroticism he's describing is going to be more appealing to me than the first book, to be honest.
People do describe it as more of an adventure book than the horror in the first one.
But the first book is really good, and everybody should read it. It just, for me, was like I had to read it very slowly.
Yeah. I'm curious from both your perspectives what it's like to do an ex-evangelical event, something that's offline and face-to-face with people, and how important that is.
Yeah. The first one that we did was in Clearwater, Florida on September 8th, and I think that we both and the other people there that were involved with it felt like it was a very positive thing, and we worked to make that an inclusive thing as we try to do an ex-evangelical community in general. And so we had queer people and women of color represented on the panel. But I think that when you do this kind of stuff in person instead of only online, there's a different feeling, and I think there's the potential to develop a kind of positive feedback loop between those two things. And when people see something visible in the community as like a kind of grassroots experience, then that can be inspiring to build more local communities. People in those local communities can discover what we do online, and vice versa. So I think that if we want to become, a kind of community that really can change national conversations and maybe can influence things for the better, then we want to be seeing more of these offline events.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I also echo those same sentiments. I'm hoping to do more of these sorts of events as part of the podcast, as well as promoting others. That I do think is sort of central to the community at large, is that it's intended to not just be about white guys like me that left evangelicalism. It's the community at large is much more diverse and representative of that, and anything that I can do personally to sort of center those conversations and make those things available is really important, and that I think will include a lot of things relative to having more local events, promoting more things, promoting one another's projects, and having these in-person events will be a key part of that.
And that's one thing that I like about the ex-evangelical community is that, we don't look at it in a competitive way at all. But as a rule, I think we're really promoting each other's work quite a bit because we want to be seen and heard. And we do that as a community, not as a handful of leaders or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm so curious, and this is not at all my background at all. So hearing all of these stories has just been it's extremely affecting emotionally, and I can't help but wonder what in the world happened in your life to take you away from talked about how when you start out as a kid, this, it makes a huge impact on you. How do you see it from a different perspective? How did you come out on the other end?
Books.
Yeah.
Books were huge. Meeting other people. For me, learning the history of the Bible was a big one. Learning the Gospels were written like 60 to 90 years after Jesus' death by people who weren't there, didn't speak to anyone who's there, didn't speak the language that was spoken there. We don't know who wrote most of the Old Testament. It was assembled by a bunch of dudes with political motivations over centuries, and they left out other books. And, that was huge for me, is just losing faith in the Bible. What about you guys?
For me, it was the initial sort of one of the sort of terms that we use, that many people use, is this term deconstruction. So you start to examine your faith and determine that you don't agree with that, what you were taught, and that's commonly called deconstruction. One of the things that for me was these sort of two things that happened simultaneously. One was also like I went to college, to a Christian college, because I thought I wanted to be a pastor, and I studied Greek, and I didn't even know that I had subconsciously believed that the Bible was like inerrant, and that just doesn't that argument just doesn't hold water when you look at the original languages. And simultaneous with that was also the run-up to the war in Iraq. And so my actual religious convictions were becoming more pacifist in orientation, but I was at a conservative Christian college that was like drumming the beats of war. So those things sort of combined to create a crisis of faith that sort of started the process. But one sort of aspect of leaving this type of all-consuming belief system and community is that you often have to process different things at different times in your life, and that can be a long process.
Evangelicalism is a very emotionally abusive ideology, and I lost track of the number of times that I would go down to altar calls and rededicate my life to Christ, and try to save my faith and be a better Christian. I think I kind of burnt myself out on it in some ways. I did have intellectual issues starting when I was around 16, and I read the entire Bible through for the first time. But then I was also afraid that maybe these doubts were actually coming from literal demons, and I had somehow opened myself up to demonic influences. I mean, a pastor point blank told me that. So I wrestled with this kind of doubt and the fear of rocking the boat. I'm an oldest child of 2 children. I didn't want to rock the boat with my family. But I was drifting very far from them politically in some ways through my college years. I mean, the first presidential election I voted in was 2000, and I thought that I had to vote for George W. Bush because of abortion. And but I already felt deeply ambivalent about that at best. And I voted for John Kerry in 2004. And I just kind of tried to hold on to it so as not to alienate my family, but eventually I couldn't anymore. And, it also became about LGBT rights, and then, only later, and this coincided with when I finally stopped being afraid of hell, which I stopped believing in hell long before I stopped having this visceral fear of it, which I've also learned is a pretty common experience, is that I recognized, and I don't think I had to recognize it as a child because I am attracted to women, but that I'm queer myself, and that not only do I not really feel any great sense of identification with maleness or masculinity, but I can be attracted to men and to people of different genders. That was a big revelation that I had happened only in my mid-30s. And then I was like, oh, this makes so much more sense now that I could that I could not stay in this subculture.
Yeah, it often takes a long time to get out of it.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have a quick question? I think we do need to wrap things up in a sec. But anyone else? We all good? Cool. Well, I'm going to be hanging out, signing books if anyone wants to buy one. And I think we're going to do some kind of meetup after this place closes, right?
Yeah. We're going to do one of the spots, probably either Lula or Merchant, one of the spots right here on this block.
Yeah,
so
if anyone wants to hang out, have a drink with us, we're around. Thanks for coming, everybody.
Thanks.
secular and inconsolable. I heard that he walked the earth. God goes